Alright, let me start with something that might feel uncomfortably familiar. You finally hit $10,000, not in theory, not in a spreadsheet. It's actually there, sitting in your account, real and visible. For a moment, just a moment, you feel lighter, taller, like you crossed an invisible line that separates barely getting I from finally okay. It feels like proof. Proof that the discipline mattered. Proof that the sacrifices weren't pointless. But then something strange happens. You hesitate before buying groceries you normally wouldn't think twice about. You hear a sound from your car you've never noticed before. And suddenly it sounds expensive. An unexpected bill shows up in your inbox. And your stomach tightens, even though, logically, you know you can cover it. Your body reacts before your brain has time to do the math. And that's when the question hits you. Why does this still feel unsafe? Why doesn't this feel like relief? Why does it feel like one wrong move could erase everything? I want to talk about that feeling because this isn't a failure. It's not you being bad with money. And it's not because $10,000 is too small in some shameful or embarrassing way. What you're experiencing is psychological, not mathematical. There's something deeper going on in the way your brain understands safety. Most people grow up believing money works like a switch, that once you reach a certain number, anxiety turns off and confidence turns on. We treat milestones like $5,000 or $10,000 as emotional finish lines. But money doesn't work like that. Your bank balance might update, but your brain doesn't instantly rewrite years of survival habits. At $10,000, you don't become someone who feels secure. You become someone who is afraid of losing $10,000. If any of this feels familiar, you're not alone. On this channel, we talk about money calmly, without hype, pressure, or shortcuts. If that kind of thinking helps you feel a little more grounded, you're welcome to stay. That's the part no one really says out loud. Here's the misunderstanding most of us grow up with. We think financial safety comes from the amount of money we have. But real safety doesn't come from the number itself. It comes from how long that money can protect your actual life as it exists today. Your rent doesn't care that you feel proud of hitting 5 figures. Your groceries don't get cheaper because you were disciplined. Your car doesn't suddenly stop breaking down out of respect for your effort. Your responsibilities don't pause just because you reached a milestone. And your brain knows this even if you don't consciously think about it. So when you hit $10,000, your mind doesn't celebrate for very long. Instead, it scans, quietly, automatically. It starts asking uncomfortable questions. How fast could this disappear? How many bad months does this really cover? What happens if 2 things go wrong at the same time? What if it's not just one emergency, but a chain of them? That's not pessimism. That's survival wiring doing exactly what it was designed to do. For most people, $10,000 represents effort more than protection. You remember every sacrifice it took to get there. The weekends you didn't go out. The things you said no to. The internal arguments you had with yourself just to stay disciplined. Because you remember how hard it was to build. Your brain labels that money as fragile. It's like carrying a glass vase through a crowded room. You're proud you have it, but you're tense the entire time. You're constantly aware of how easily it could shatter. And that tension is where the anxiety comes from. At this stage, money still feels like something you must defend, not something that defends you. Think about how you react to an unexpected expense at $10,000. Even if you can pay it, your body reacts first. Your shoulders tighten. Your chest feels heavy. There's a flash of irritation or stress. Not because the math doesn't work, but because emotionally it feels like regression. It feels like going backward after finally moving forward. That's because at this level, every withdrawal feels personal. Your savings still feels like progress, not padding. It feels like something you're building, not something that's already built. So every dollar that leaves feels like it's undoing something important. There's another layer to this that rarely gets talked about. Most people don't just carry financial pressure. They carry identity pressure tied to money. At $10,000, you don't just fear being broke again. You fear feeling like you failed again. Like all that discipline didn't actually buy you peace. Like you worked this hard and still didn't make it to safety. So you guard the money harder than you guard your time. Harder than your energy. Sometimes even harder than your health. You hesitate. You overthink. You replay decisions after you make them. Not because you're irresponsible, but because the money still feels fragile. That's why $10,000 often feels heavier than people expect. It's not freedom yet. It's responsibility. It's proof that progress exists, but also proof that it can be lost. And that combination creates tension. Now let's talk about what quietly starts to change around 20,000, not overnight, not magically, but gradually, in a way you usually don't notice until you look back and realize things feel different. The biggest shift around $20,000 isn't the number itself. It's what the number represents in time. At this level, for the first time, your money starts to feel boring. And that might sound like an insult, but it's actually the goal. Boring money doesn't demand your constant attention. It doesn't sit in the front of your mind all day. It doesn't turn every decision into a debate. At this level, you stop thinking in single emergencies and start thinking in seasons. You stop asking, what if something goes wrong? And start asking, if something goes wrong, how long am I okay? That's a completely different mental framework. Let's say your core monthly expenses are $2,500. $10,000, you're looking at 4 months. On paper, that sounds decent. But your brain knows how fast 4 months can disappear. A job loss, a medical issue, a family obligation. Suddenly, 4 becomes 2. At $20,000, you're looking at 8 months. And something subtle happens psychologically. You stop catastrophizing as quickly. Your nervous system relaxes. There's room to breathe. You're no longer operating in constant urgency. This is where money starts acting less like a trophy and more like insulation. Insulation doesn't stop the storm. It just makes the inside quieter. And that quiet is everything. Because when your mind is quieter, your decisions get better. You don't rush. You don't panic. You don't grab the first option just to make the anxiety go away. At this level, you don't feel rich. You feel unrushed. You stop making decisions under pressure. You negotiate better. You say no more easily. You wait. And waiting is an underrated financial superpower. At $10,000, waiting feels risky. You're afraid that inaction might cost you something. At $20,000, waiting feels safe. You know you have time, and time changes behavior more than money ever does. Here's something people don't expect. Your spending doesn't explode at $20,000, it actually becomes calmer. Because when money feels less fragile, you don't feel the need to prove anything with it. You don't get that anxious urge to use it while you have it. You don't feel like one. Purchase might ruin everything. You start making cleaner decisions. Not because you're suddenly more disciplined, but because you're less scared. Fear is what drives impulsive behavior, not freedom. When fear drops, spending stabilizes. This is also where investing starts to feel different. At $10,000, investing often feels like gambling, like you're risking safety for growth. At $20,000, it feels more like allocation. You're not putting your last lifeboat into the water. You're sending out a smaller boat while the ship stays intact. That psychological difference matters more than people realize. Because when people invest from fear, they overreact. They check balances constantly. They panic at normal fluctuations. They pull out at the worst possible times. When people invest from stability, they zoom out. They understand time. They let compounding do its quiet work. This isn't about intelligence. It's about emotional bandwidth. And that's really what changes between $10,000 and $20,000. Your emotional bandwidth expands. You have space to think about things beyond survival. Not luxury, just stability, health, energy, future choices. You start asking better questions. Not, how do I make more money right now? But what kind of life am I actually trying to protect? That shift is subtle, but it's powerful. It's the moment money stops being the center of your thoughts and starts becoming a support system in the background. So what do you actually do with this information? First, you stop judging yourself for how $10,000 feels. If it still feels unsafe, that doesn't mean you're ungrateful or bad with money. It means your brain is accurately assessing risk based on your lived reality. Second, you stop treating $10,000 as the finish line. It's not. It's a transition point between survival and stability building. Instead of asking, why don't I feel secure yet? You ask, what would make my life feel more buffered? Maybe it's not even $20,000 exactly. Maybe it's 6 months of expenses. Maybe it's lowering a fixed cost so your money stretches further. Sometimes safety comes from shrinking the problem, not just growing the number. If this didn't make you feel excited, but it did make things feel a little clearer, then this is probably the right place for you. When you're ready, the next conversation will be here. You also stop rushing the process. The people who feel the most peace at higher balances aren't the ones who sprinted there and burned themselves out. They're the ones who built trust with themselves over time, month after month, choice after choice. That trust matters as much as the money. And finally, remember this. Safety isn't about never worrying again. It's about worrying less often for shorter periods, with more options available to you. That's what changes as your buffer grows. If you're at $10,000 right now and it still feels heavy, you're not behind. You're not broken. You're standing in the middle of the bridge, not at the other side yet. And bridges aren't meant to feel comfortable. They're meant to get you somewhere. Progress doesn't feel like relief at first. It feels like responsibility. But if you keep going, calmly, steadily, without turning this into a punishment, you'll reach a point where money stops, feeling like something you're holding on to with both hands, and starts feeling like something that's holding you. That's when things really begin to change.